Today's episode I have really been looking forward to for a while. Now, if you have been in the hobby a couple of years or so, you may very well have one of these. This is the original Mobius camera. I say original. This is actually the second version that came out. The original version didn't have a wide-angle lens, and then they brought out this 120-degree version, and then I think they brought out a third version, which they called the C. I don't have that version. Doesn't matter anyways. But I often say that this guy revolutionized the hobby. So why did it do that? Well, when multi-rotors first came out, you mostly had to build them yourself, and the best option for getting HD footage back was a GoPro, and of course those were extremely expensive and still are. And what this brought to the table was HD at 30 frames per second, very similar quality to a GoPro, some would argue that, but it was cheap as beans and it was fantastic, and I bought about 7 of them. I probably could have bought a GoPro for the amount that I spent on these. The thing is though, this guy, I used it in my 3D video recently, but it doesn't really get used, and that is because cameras have advanced, and my favorite camera, which is in this form factor, is the Foxeer Legend 1. I also have the Foxeer Legend 2 to try, but that's a different video. Anyway, what I'm saying is I think a lot of people have moved on from this, and while people have been moving on from this, the guys that made the Mobius have been up to something quite incredible. Now, the people who made the Mobius actually didn't start with the Mobius. They started with this guy. This is the 808-16 camera, and this was the guy that came before this one, and this one was a repurposed spy camera. You can see it didn't used to have this wide-angle lens on the front here, just had a pinhole at the front, and this was meant to be a keychain, and you sort of filmed people with it, but of course people in the RC hobby realized that it was lightweight, fairly decent quality for 720p, so we started sticking them on models, and there hasn't been anything like it since. I recently stuck this on my 130 size model that I built, and it still stood up to today's standards. So, in the background, Mobius has been working on a different camera, and that is this one that I have got here, and they call it the Mobius 2. So let's just take this out of the box. So you can see here that the form factor is very similar, about the same. It's just not got a heatsink on the top there. Instead, we've got these screws underneath for a tripod mount. Now, what have they been doing? This one records in 1080p 60, which is what we advanced to from this, which is what everyone likes. This one, 1080p 30. This one, 1080p 60. But the problem is though, models are getting so small now. I recently built that 130 size quadcopter on the channel, and I didn't think it'd get any smaller than that, and then you can get 120 size quadcopters, and these cameras are too big to fit on the top of them, even though they're very good. So I have to come back to this guy. I put this on the 130 build and it performed great, but it only performed 720p at 30 frames per second. But guess what? There is another option, and that is this guy. Similar sort of box to the Mobius 2. It has a magnet on it here. Can you see there? Really nice box. Lifts up, bit of foam. We have got what they are calling the Mobius Mini. Now, I dismissed this at first because I assumed what they had done is taken the original Mobius and shrunk it down. So that sort of put me off, you see, because I kind of moved on from the quality of this. But what they have done is they have shrunk this one down. The Mobius Mini is the Mobius 2 shrunk down, not the Mobius 1. So that means, get ready for this, 1080p, 60 frames per second, 24 grams, the same size, sorry, smaller than the 808-16 camera. That's incredible, isn't it? So happy days for our micros, right? And it's got all of the same settings as the Mobius 2. And it actually does 1440p as well. So the differences between these two is the field of view. So this one's 110 degrees field of view, still quite respectable. This one, I think, 120, so it's a wider image. And there is a downside to this, of course, there has to be, and that is the battery. So it can only have a 300 milliamp battery in there, which means only 30 minutes of constant recording at 60 frames per second. More if you want to do 30 frames per second. Whereas this one, 850 milliamp battery, probably get, you know, an hour and a half, something like that. So yes, there is a downside to that. However, I don't really care about that, because I have been after a camera that can fit on the top of here. This is my 130 model that I built on the channel recently, and I absolutely love it. Oh, by the way, I put some HQ 3-inch props on here. I swapped them out because they're a little bit lighter than the props that it comes with. It's really nice props, these, nice and light, but they do break quite easily. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about that. What I'm going to do is take this little Mobius Mini. I have put a little cable tie around it there. I've got a run cam Velcro strap there, keeping it in the brand, you know. And then that's just gonna tighten over the top there, like that. And then we've got a 130 size quadcopter that can do 1080p 60 or 1440p 30. How amazing is that? So let's see what else you get in the box. We have got this little pouch here with stuff in. So we have got, oh, this is just fantastic. So we have got a video out cable. So it does video out. Really nice. And I guess you could find a way to charge this off your flight battery as well if you're worried about the battery being used up. So yeah, video out. And we've got a charger cable. So this is a USB 2 cable. Let me just take this out of here. So yeah, USB 2 cable, not the Mini, surprisingly. And that just slots into the back there, like that. And you can charge it off that, I guess. And you can also connect to the computer for the configurator. We'll take a look at that in a bit. So, not a lot of stuff, but that's all that you need. So, how do we work it? Well, pretty much the same as the Mobius, slightly different in the configurator, but not a lot. We've got our power button on the side here, and then we've got our shutter button, so you can take a video or a photo, and then you've got your modes button here as well. Then on the side here we have the micro SD card slot. You are not given a micro SD card. It's going to need to be a ultra one if you want to do the 60 frames per second, otherwise you might get a jerky 60 frames per second. We've got an LED recording indicator here, and then we've got a reset button here, so if the camera's misbehaving, like it sometimes does, they lock up. The Mobius did it too. There's a little reset button there, put a pin in there, and it doesn't reset all your settings. All it does is kickstarts the processor if it hangs up, which is interesting, so you don't need to worry about wiping all your settings pressing that reset button. And a bit of a downside with this, that has happened to me a couple of times, but it's not a big deal. You know, I can't complain about a camera that is this size. I mean, I never dreamt of it, you know, especially with 60 FPS as well. Okay, so let's power this thing up. We've got the power button on the side there. Just hold it down for a couple of seconds and this one starts flashing. Then we get a solid orangey yellow color. And then we have the shutter button here to start recording. And that will start flashing there, and then you can also stop recording. So you have got 3 different modes. The first mode shows as this orange color here, and that is your first video resolution, so you can set that up in the configurator. I'll show you that. And then another press of the M button should change it to blue, and then that's a second video resolution that you can set up. And then the third one is a red light, and that is to take a picture. I'm not going to be using that, but now that acts as a photo shutter button. And then cycle back on that one to here. Now if you have got the exposure lock set up, then when you're recording, a short press of this will capture the exposure. Now that is something that is fantastic about this camera. You see, a problem with the original Mobius here was the wide dynamic range issue, in that you would be flying along, point up to the sky, the camera would adjust for the extra light going in here, and then when it pointed back to the ground it was all dark for a brief second. What you can do with this one is, before you take off, set the camera level, start the recording, and then dab the power button there, and it will lock the exposure to whatever it is set at, meaning that if you point to the sky, it'll just overexpose the sky rather than adjusting it. So when you point back to the ground never changes, so you don't get that light and dark effect. However, I believe they have a good wide dynamic range on this Mini Mobius, as well as the Mobius 2, so we might not need to use that, but it's a nice feature and I'll show you the settings for that. So here we are in the configurator. It's the same configurator for the original Mobius, and I use it also for the 808-16. I'll put a link to it in the description. Now you can see here that it has noticed a SD card here, but if you click on it, you get this warning message here: press the shutter button to enter configuration mode, and this is where it's different than the original Mobius. So I'm going to do that on the camera, and then the light on the camera changes blue and green, and now I should be able to click on it here and change the settings. So it's in webcam mode, I believe, to change the settings here, and all very similar settings to before if you have used a Mobius. So you can set it to sync the date and time off your computer. It's on yes, but I have turned the timestamp off. Now it's switched on from standard, so you are going to want to hook this up to a computer if you want to turn that off, because that's not really any good for flying. Recording indicator on, you want that on so you know when the video is recording. I can't see why you'd want to turn that off, but there you go. I guess if you're using it for a car DVR perhaps. Rotate image, so you can have it inverted if you're mounting the camera upside down, same as before. Artificial light frequency, so this is to do with the country that you are in. I'm based in Europe, so I want 50 Hertz, otherwise if I selected 60, I would get flashing lights at night time if I was using artificial light whilst recording with the camera. You can choose the TV out format, so NTSC or PAL, fantastic. Change the date format, of course I'm not using that. Power off standby, I have got it set to 30 seconds. I should probably turn that off to save a bit of battery. That's the amount of time the camera will remain on until it times out when you're not recording. Auto record on external power, I have got turned off, but you could power the camera up and it start recording if you want to use it as a car DVR. On-screen display language, so this is for your TV out. You can select different languages there. So video mode, so this is your 3 different buttons there, but this is really just for the first 2, mode 1 and mode 2, and then general modes here, so we can have the audio recording on. Of course I want that. Motion detect off. Image stabilizer, I think that is digital stabilization, so good that it's got it, but I'm not going to be using it on this mini quad. Loop recording, again, it's off, but that will be if you're wanting to use it as a DVR. External microphone, good option, but I don't need it for this one. On-screen display, I've got turned on, but that's just for when you are using the video out. File type, I like to work with MP4, so I'm going to stick to that. Field of view, wide. So this is my mode 1, 1920 by 1080, and then I've got 60 FPS selected. You can do 1440p there as well, and if you want to go 720p, you can also do 120 frames per second or QVGA at 240 frames per second. Then you can have a different setting on your second button there. So I've got the video quality set to super fine and the clip length at max there. So if we go into photo mode here, you can change the frame size, image quality. I haven't changed any of these settings. These are just the default, so it's set to normal. But time-lapse off there, and I haven't really paid much attention to these. These ones, though, I have. This is interesting here. So you can lock the exposure. So as I was explaining before, I'm going to try that out because it's something that the Mobius has struggled with in the past. So you can get the camera pointed slightly to the ground, get a bit of the sky in, lock the exposure, and then we won't have any dark patches when we're doing flips and stuff. Same with the white balance. With the original Mobius, you used to get quite a change in the colour. So the grass would go from a bright green to like a bluey colour. So you can lock the white balance as well, and I'll be checking that out. But hopefully they've improved it in general with this camera. And then you've got exposure metering if you're not using these, and I've just got it set to multi-spot, and I'm going to check that out. But you can basically use all of these different settings here like you would on a professional camera like a DSLR or something like that. And you can manually set the white balance as well if you like. And then I don't really need to go through this, but you can update the firmware, so I had to do that with this one. And within there as well, you can flash the firmware. So that's enough talking. Let's get this on that 130 quadcopter and see how it performs. So this first flight is with the automatic exposure and automatic white balance as well, and it performed pretty well, I have to say. Now this isn't the best of days to be showcasing this camera because we have got the sun on the horizon, which is unavoidable this time of year. And we're getting a little bit of vibration off that quadcopter there when it throttles up, but it's not too bad. But this camera does seem to be a bit susceptible to rolling shutter because I did put it on my 250 mini quad and it did the same as well. Not as bad as this, but a little bit of vibration. But I have to say I'm really happy with this, and I imagine on a duller day where it's overcast, you wouldn't see any vibration at all. It's just there's so much light going into that camera. And I do think that the camera is just slightly overexposing. Maybe that's just a matter of opinion, but it seems like we have got a very bright image there. One thing I was pleased about though is it doesn't seem to affect the flight characteristics of my 130. And this is using a 3-cell setup, so I imagine if you built a 130 quad and made it as a 4S, you would not recognize the extra weight at all. So I think I might be doing that in the future. You're definitely going to be seeing more of this camera in the future. I just love the 60 frames per second and 1080p on a micro, amazing. Just look at that, look how steady it is when I fly it nice and normal. It's only when I give it crazy throttle that we get vibrations. Of course that's probably from the propellers, you know. Such a small quadcopter like this, impossible to get no vibrations when everything is just so close together. I reckon if I put a foam pad underneath that camera mount there, then it would be a lot better, but honestly it didn't bother me too much, and it's very rarely sunny like this around winter, so I don't know, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. I think this is a fantastic advancement for the hobby. It's something that I sort of missed really, too busy concentrating on other cameras, assuming that the Mobius would not be the best camera and a mini version just would be no good. This is just fantastic, and it's the way the hobby's going. We need smaller cameras if we're having smaller quadcopters, and this is the way forward. And the minute I saw this footage I went and bought another one straight away. Anyway, what I'm going to do is come in for a landing, and then I'm going to lock the exposure, and you can take a look at that and see if you prefer it. I'm really torn between the two, to be honest, because the wide dynamic range of the camera is so good anyways. But you'll see here that the ground is a little bit darker, the trees are darker, and that doesn't change because the exposure and white balance is now locked. So you can see when we point towards the sun there, it doesn't get too bright, and the ground is a little bit darker than before, but it stays that way. You know, you have to play around with it. I found that pointing the camera straight forward got me the best results, and I'm pretty happy with it. Something that I forgot to mention in that first clip is the microphone quality. It is fantastic for speaking, so this could be used as a review camera as well, and it's getting some nice sound from the motors. Well, there you go, that is my review of the Mobius Mini. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll put a link in the description if you wish to buy one. As always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.
there's no need